Hi everyone, this is New Sensei. Many of you know that archery can be quite expensive to start with. Not only do you have to buy the bow, you also have to buy the arrows and the accessories and everything else in your shooting kit. That can add up to hundreds of dollars. And for an absolute beginner who wants to try archery and muck around with their own gear, hundreds is not an option. You want to buy a bow that is as cheap as possible but still gives you a satisfying experience for archery. Now if you go too low in the price range, you end up with really cheap youth fiberglass bows or unreliable bows which don't give you the right feel for archery. Nonetheless, there are options which you can look at which may be of good value to you. Now, some of these options are relatively unknown Chinese brands which are more popular on eBay or Alibaba or Amazon, and some of these can be looked down upon by experienced archers, but some of them may be surprising in terms of their value. So today, we'll be taking a look at the Topoint R2. I'm actually going to do this straight from the box. Topoint sells complete kits which are ready to shoot, and I do want to emphasize that these really are ready to shoot. Now the box comes as is. You get the Topoint box here. The company, by the way, sells as Ningbo Topoint, so it's a Chinese company, and everything comes as is. Now this particular package is the Topoint R2, which comes in I think from £20 to £34. This is the £32 set. So what you get is as follows. So here we have the riser. Like I said before, this is a very light aluminium riser. I'm actually really surprised and impressed at how light it is. The aluminium risers at low level tend to be quite dense and heavy, and that can be quite fatiguing for new archers. This riser is probably more like a wooden riser in weight, and that's saying a lot. And for that reason, this can be a viable alternative to wooden risers for club bows, and you can see some clubs using this sort of riser. Now this riser does come with several standard mounting points. You have the standard holes for a sight, you have a plunger button hole, you also have the stainless steel stabilizer bushing. Now do note that there are no top or bottom stabilizer bushings. That's more for the advanced bows, and the limb pocket system is a bolt-on system, which is again typical of the beginner bows. It is not IOF compatible for obvious reasons, but that's something that you have to sacrifice as part of its low price. The grip is actually quite good. It's made from a smooth plastic, but it's the shape that makes it stand out. It has a very similar shape to the entry-level bows like the SF bows or the Samick bows, and that's a great thing. I often criticize very cheap low-end bows for their grips because they're often the wrong shape. You kind of need to have some shooting experience to adjust to different shapes. This one is a standard shape for most competitive target bows. So you can see that the hand slides in quite naturally into the groove. There's a support base for the thumb, so you don't grip it too tightly. It's just sitting there. There's enough space in the front to hold it if you want to, but it has the right mold so your hand naturally fits it correctly like this. And I think this is one of the big points of value for this riser, which people might underrate. The grip is a good learning grip. It is no worse than any wooden recurve a club uses. So for a riser this cheap, are there any obvious faults? I don't think so. It reminds me aesthetically of the SF Axiom series. So it has a certain industrial design which is quite plain, and this isn't a bow that's gonna impress people, but it functions. The finish is good enough. It's a plain cast mold. There's nothing particularly special about it. You can see some really obvious seams, some of the areas down here. and the grip has a very obvious seam. But apart from that, it's actually a fairly smooth finish, and in some ways it looks better than the SF Axiom. But that's basically where the cost comes from. It's not a fancy design, it's just plain and simple. These are the limbs. The branding is quite plain. It's a plain black limb with a Topoint R2 branding on the front, and on the back you have an R2. Do note that this does come in 68-inch and 64-inch models, so it is quite accessible to new learners. A lot of the low-end bows tend to be very small, so you don't get the right size to comfortably learn with. Having a 68-inch or 64-inch gives you options for juniors and adults. As you can see, it's a simple wooden limb. Nothing too fancy. It'll get you started, and that's all you need. Apart from the bow itself, the kit comes with a lot of accessories, and honestly, I think the value of this kit is in the accessories. So you get a quiver. The quiver is a fairly typical belt clip-on quiver. It does the job, but I'm not too fond of belt quivers. Nonetheless, for a first quiver, it's fine. You also get 12 arrows. These are unfortunately very cheap fiberglass arrows, not carbon arrows. They're okay to start with, there's nothing wrong with that, and you probably go through these quite quickly because, as with all beginners, you can expect to lose or break your arrows. Unfortunately, if you do break nocks or lose points or break shafts, these aren't replaceable. You can't order more arrows, but you can expect to order a new set very soon anyway. So this is okay to get you started. I do want to note that because of the belt quiver's design, it does tend to be quite front heavy. If you wear it on your hip, you may find the arrows will fall out like that. I want to mention quickly that some people might find a shaft or two with no point. The points are these very small basic screw-in points. They're fine, but they do come loose quite easily when you shoot with them and when they're in storage or when they're being posted. So you might actually have loose points somewhere in your quiver or in the box. There should be enough points for all of your arrows. The kit also comes with a leather arm guard. There's nothing special about this except that it does cater to beginners. Many beginners are very afraid of being hit by the bowstring and they will get bruises on their inner arm. So having a large arm guard that covers the forearm and the elbow joint can be a great peace of mind for new shooters. Now, of course, being a cheap accessory, there are some limitations. I really dislike the straps. They are elastic, but they're not clips. They have to be threaded through this clip here, and they can be quite flimsy to adjust and it comes off easily. I find it quite frustrating to use, but nonetheless, it's not bad value for money. The finger tab is, again, a fairly plain, simple black leather finger tab. Nothing too special about it. It's a single layer, so it's quite thin. And the attachment is this ribbon with the clip at the back. So it works quite well. And this is actually a pretty decent design for a beginner tab. My main concern is that the thinness of the tab might be a bit painful to use with heavier draw weights. This is the sight. It's a fairly plain plastic sight. You can buy these separately for like $15. And this has a lot of clumsiness, as if all cheap sights. The screws will tend to come loose after shooting due to vibration, which means that if you're not careful, the sight might drop off completely. So you have to make sure these are tightened after every few shots. This is mounted on this very cheap plastic bar, which is mounted on this very cheap plastic bar. This attaches straight to the riser, and you can adjust for length, which is surprising. You would normally find this in a high-end sight, but that's something you can play around with. So it functions, it's a good sight to learn with. Downside is lots of small parts that come loose and can be lost, so you do have to be a bit careful in making sure it functions and stays as tight as possible. The bow comes with this magnetic rest. It's actually a pretty decent rest. You will often buy this separately for like $10, and it's a pretty good entry-level rest. The problem with this, and if you've seen the Topoint R2 review by Stephen Han on Archery Supplies, he mentions that this sort of rest is best used with a plunger button, and I do agree. The problem with this rest is that there is little clearance, so the arrow may come in contact with the rest or the riser, and there's nothing to push it away. By having a plunger button, the spring cushions the arrow and pushes it away from the riser. Otherwise, you need to use one of those cheap plastic super rest or hunter rest, which have an inbuilt plate, which does the same thing. So you may have to replace the rest. It's a decent rest if you have a plunger button, but otherwise you may find that the arrow does not clear the bow properly, and we'll see that a bit later. It comes with a standard bow stringer. You should always be stringing your bow with a bow stringer. Don't be too reckless. This is by far the safest way. Surprisingly, the kit comes with an arrow puller. This is actually a pretty good design. It's a nice chunky grip, good ergonomic feel. You can grab the shaft and pull it quite well. Even more surprising is a tube of wax. This is used to lubricate the string. You normally have to buy this separately, but most kits don't come with wax. So again, I'm actually surprised the kit comes with so many accessories. I do think that this really was designed to be ready to shoot. And to top it off, it comes with a full Allen key set. This is really cool. You can buy this from any hardware store, but most bow kits come with separate Allen keys, which you will lose all the time. So having an actual Allen key set is an interesting functional option for a ready-to-shoot kit. This is actually one of my favorite inclusions. And it comes with a manual. This is written in Chinese and English, and more importantly, it is a visual explanation of all the parts of the bow and how to assemble them. So if you can't quite follow the Chinglish, then you may find that the visuals are just as good. Assembling the bow is quite easy. You slide the limb into the limb pocket, and you use the bolts which come with the kit to screw it in, and that's basically it. You do that for the top limb. You've got to hold it in place. Pretty easy to turn. A lot of the beginner limbs have very frustrating bolt to work with, but this one is quite good. Nice grip, and that's nice and tight. And same thing for the bottom limb. So slide it in there. It doesn't lock in, so you have to hold it in place. But it lines up quite well, as it should. And there we go. I do find it's easy to assemble than a Samick Sage and a Samick Polaris. Those things take a lot of turns. This is quite easy in comparison. I should point out that this bow is a full-size 68-inch target bow. One thing I'm surprised about is that the kit does not have knocking points. It has everything else, but for some reason the kit does not include knocking points, which means you need to either buy your own or use thread to make your own knocking points. That's the rest attached. I don't have the plastic super rest with me right now, so I'm going to use the one which came with the kit just to showcase what you get straight out of the box. I do want to note that when I peeled the backing tape for the rest, the adhesive nearly came all the way off. So again, it's a little cheap. I managed to stick it on anyway, but that was a surprising fault. I've got a negative about this sight. There are too many of these small nuts. The problem is that if you unscrew something or something comes loose, these nuts would come flying off. Now, while I was assembling the sight, I dropped the sight, and of course, I've lost the nut. It's okay if you have a workbench. I'm in a large shed. I have no idea where it is, and I can't finish assembling the sight. I've got one end that's still loose. It'll hold, but it will rattle and annoy me. I think this is a very big problem. You get what you pay for, but that's so frustrating. So here I have the R2 fully assembled. It's not a bad looking bow, to be honest. It actually handles and holds very much like a solid beginner riser. Apart from the frustration with the cheap sight and the missing nut, everything seemed to be okay. So let's give it a shot. Yeah, the knocks are a bit too tight. I've noticed that it comes off the string too easily, and that one came right off. That wasn't a good first shot. And again, knock came clean off. Just way too tight on the serving. In fact, I've bent the rest already. Jeez, some quality issues right there. Alright, that one stayed on. It's funny because I was doing some testing off camera before, and my first 3 arrows were completely fine. I had no problems with the arrows grouping. But gee, something looks bent with the oh, that is poor. Alright, here's what I'm trying to show you, right? So when I disengage the magnet, the thing moves freely. That's a huge problem. Because each time you knock the arrow, it's going to knock the rest down. So as a beginner, you won't realize this, and you're going to start shooting everywhere. This is not a reliable rest. Yeah, I can't knock the arrow properly if it's disengaged. The magnet has to be on. If it flips, the thing comes off. That's frustrating. Jeez. See what I mean by the knocks are way too tight. Just a slight flinch. And I don't normally do this with any of my bows. This is the only bow which I'm having trouble with. What the? And all the arrows are whipping to the right. I'm at 10 meters away. I'm shooting at a 122 centimeter face, and I'm striking the blue from this distance. Pretty consistent, by the way, but I think that's a big letdown. The rest on this bow on this kit rather, is abysmal. You really need that plunger button or that plastic rest to make it work. This is not functional. No, that is absolutely terrible arrow clearance. And again, I've knocked the rest down. It just keeps on doing that. This is impossible to shoot consistently. No, that is, again, the arm drops down. I cannot believe how, well, I should believe it, but I want to be more optimistic, but this is a dysfunctional rest. And it's dropped down again. I'll try one more shot if, no. The moment I put it on, it moves. I would show you the slow motion for the arrow clearance, but I literally cannot put my arrow on. When I place it on, this is what happens, right? It just taps it, and if it comes off, and you put it back on, it just keeps on coming off like that. And I'm holding the bow vertical, by the way. The knock is way too tight. This is really frustrating. So the knock should be a gentle fit, but See how tight that is? And you come here, and it's, here you go, see? You can flick it upward by accident, so now it's flipping upwards. You try and tap it down, and this is really frustrating. Speaking of which, the veins are also quite poor. You can see the nuts come off on my first shot, but the veins, they're very soft plastic. They're not hard plastic, so most plastic veins keep their shape. Many of these veins are bent out of shape without even being used. You can see this one here, this white fletching is completely bent out. I mean, it shouldn't affect the arrow too much, but again, the finish of this is disappointing. I managed to find a hunter style rest, so I've completely scrapped the other one. That's not usable. Let's see how it works with this one. Wow, that was atrocious. The arrow just did not clear the bow. That's even worse. I can't seem to make it work with this rest. It's funny because I've seen the review by Stephen from Archery Supplies, and he shot, I think I shot a 24 pound R2. This is a 32 pound R2, and this is atrocious. Right in the arm too. I'm not having a good time with this. When was the last time I struck my own arm with a bow? Again, that is really frustrating. I might try a higher anchor this time actually. Yeah, high anchor seems to clear better. Now, the arrow clearance is terrible. These arrows did not come out well from a 32 pound bow. Now, because of my draw length, it's not 32 pound. I'm pretty sure it'd be like 28 or something. But the arrows are random. What is good? Well, it's consistently random. That makes sense. And that was a consistent shot. The limbs aren't that gentle to use either. Good limbs are quite soft. That is not working well for me. I know I'm collapsing my shot, but I don't trust the bow. Well, that came out really poorly. Oh dear. So here you can see my initial grouping here. So when I changed my anchor to a high anchor, there are 3 arrows down here. All my other shots are consistently to the right. Apart from not having a plunger button, this tells me that these arrows are far too soft. And again, if you've seen the other review by Archery Supplies, Stephen had a very good experience. The arrows came out quite nicely. He got gold right away, but he shot a 24 pound bow. I'm shooting something which is about 10 pounds higher, and I'm going way to the right. So the arrows that come with this bow don't seem to work very well, and I'm seeing a lot of fishtailing. I sense there are lots of arrow clearance problems. We'll try again, but this is not inspiring faith in me. Alright, let's try again. And I should point out that I'm not a bad archer. You've seen me shoot, I do much better than this. It might be because there's no clicker and no stabilizer, but I don't feel, I mean, the bow feels good in the hand, but the draw doesn't feel comfortable. Maybe I'm getting too snobby, but I can't quite make it work. Now on the plus side, the knocks didn't come off this time, so something's changed. Maybe the serving's very bit thin. We'll try again with the sight. I'm only doing it with this bow. Slightly better shot. I didn't flinch as much there. Now I've got a short draw length, but I do feel the extra weight. This doesn't feel like a normal 32-pound limb. Knock him off. Good grouping, again on the right. Yeah, I'm pretty convinced these arrows are way too soft. There's no markers on these arrows, it doesn't tell you what they are. I'm pretty sure they're fiberglass. I was told they were. That nearly missed the target completely at 10 meters. Yeah, it was a pretty crappy shot, but you can tell I'm not in the mindset now to shoot well. This is kind of like I'm hoping to punch a hole in the wall at 10 meters. Now, that is so soft. It's almost dangerous. This might be my last arrow from this set. So I can't guarantee the arrow's going to hit the target from this distance. And again, I'm only 10 meters away. What was that? Yeah, this isn't right. I mean, it's clearly, yeah, I can see it now. It's definitely hitting the bow. There are huge clearance issues. So these are the wrong spined arrows. If you imagine you're a beginner and you've got a 32-pound bow for your first set, this is not going to work well for you. And again, I think you've got the 24-pound set that was reviewed by Archery suppliers. You might find better results. This is not working for me. Yep, that kicked wickedly and grouped with the rest. I'll show you in a moment. But that was such a wicked kick. I'm not pleased with this. And this is why you've got to buy good arrows. I can't emphasize enough why you just can't buy cheap fiberglass arrows off eBay. You need proper arrows for your bow. And even with the ones which came with the set here, these are cheap arrows which don't work. You can imagine like shooting this as a beginner and being so frustrated. Because I'm getting frustrated right now. It's a consistent grouping, which means that this is definitely a spine issue. So I'm aiming dead center. I've got a pretty good grouping over here. And that's my flyer there. There are, I can see and I can hear clearance issues. Yeah, definitely not these arrows. I mean, I can see here there are streaks from the clearance issues. So, if anything, the arrows are definitely at fault. So, just to remove a variable, I've picked up some Eastern Genesis arrows. These are very stiff aluminium arrows, which are far stiffer than what they're meant for. But they come out so much better from this bow. That was in the middle. The anchor release was sloppy, but that came out quite nicely. This is the sweet feeling you need to have when you buy your bow. You need to find the right matching arrows. Otherwise, you're full of frustration. Oops, that's a bad shot on my part. It's not perfect, but they come out far nicer. They do hit close towards the middle, so at least we know it's more of an arrow problem rather than the bow itself. So what are my thoughts on the R2? As you can probably tell, I started the review optimistic and open-minded and willing to give the kit a shot. However, I do have a certain prejudice against very cheap bow kits. And unfortunately, the Topoint R2 reinforces that sentiment. Is the bow itself good? I think the bow itself is fine for beginners. I find there are many flaws in the kit, and this is why I almost never recommend that people buy cheap kits like this. The reason is you end up replacing nearly every part of the kit nearly straight away. As I showed you before, I basically threw away the arm guard, the finger tab is so-so, the sight was absolutely frustrating to work with, the rest didn't work, it broke and I had to replace it within like 5 minutes, and the arrows weren't the right match. So again, it's a good example of those cheap arrows which are meant for everything but don't suit anything. If you're shooting a lower poundage version of the R2, then great, I think you have much better luck, but this is the kit that I was given. This is the 32-pound kit, and the arrows did not work. If I was a beginner and I was shooting like that, I'd be so angry at myself that I quit archery. So I really want to like the bow, but I'm going to say you have to be mindful of what you are getting for the price. This is not a quality bow. It does function, but there are a lot of inconveniences, and some of these are minor, some of these heavily affect your experience of archery. So yeah, I think as a club shooter, I wouldn't mind having some of these in the club because this is kind of a deluxe beginner bow, but I would not get in heavy weight. I think recommending the 32-pound R2 is excessive for a first bow. I think if you're going to get the R2, you might as well enjoy it for a light bow to have fun with and learn form with. So perhaps the 20 to 25 pound range would be a better option. I think the accessories are much more suitable for that kind of shooting. This I find is difficult to use. Again, I've had a lot of frustrations with it. I'm not shooting well with it. I find the limbs, even at my draw length, they stack a bit towards the end. There's a reason why good limbs are good limbs. These work, but they're quite stiff on the draw. I didn't find that, especially at that last inch or so, it gets really tough. So yeah, and this is a full length bow too. It's not a short bow which stacks easily. So yeah, I find this to be, I don't want to say a negative review. I find it's hard to recommend. I'm trying to be unbiased, I'm trying to be open-minded, but you can see my frustration. I had so many issues with the kit itself. The bow, I think, will stand okay, because again, you're only spending about $120 on the bow itself, and that's a pretty good deal. But I had far much more fun shooting a wooden recurve, because at least the things match up well. So yeah, take it for what it is. It's value for money if you're not intending to go very far in archery and you just want a kit to shoot with. And yes, while it may only cost $180 or $200, how much money are you going to spend to replace the parts which are useless to you? That's why, as much as I think this is a good value package, you might be better off spending a decent amount of money on a decent bow that you can definitely use and grow into, instead of replacing everything. That to me is a big loss of value. And again, I think the body of the bow, the riser and the limbs work okay. but the kit I think is a thumbs down from me. Anyway, this is New Sensei. Hope you found this helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.